Okay, hello everybody. This is Guy Bevente. Let me start by welcoming all of you to our session today. Our webinar is titled High Payback Automation in Telecom. Without a doubt, telecommunication companies at all tiers are continuously looking for ways to maximize their technology investments. Clearly, there are many technology opportunities to pursue, but some tough decisions have to be made on where can we all invest our precious, and let's face it, sometimes limited capital. So given the need to maximize return on investments, where should telcos place their big bets, right? And where should we look at investing in terms of technology and automation to achieve high payback? That is the question we're going to explore today, and we will specifically focus on 4 technologies that we have all seen are leading trends. They're front and center at most telcos, and they include cloud, edge, artificial intelligence, and analytics. So joining me today are some industry experts, so I'd like to get right into it and introduce them first. So we have Sai-Kumar Dubagunta. Sai is a veteran of the telecommunications industry. In his career of more than 28 years, he has had many roles and worked across a wide spectrum of areas that include things like embedded software development, distributed computing, network management, security across both network and applications, cloud native computing, and much more. He currently works as the head of solutions delivery at HCL's telecommunications service provider group. He's actively engaged in solutions for network transformation and digital transformation. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you, Guy. Nice to be here.
Also with me is Brian Estes. Brian is a managing director in Deloitte Consulting's technology, media, and telecom practice, specializing in IT transformation, systems integration, and outsourcing. Brian has spent over 30 years helping telecommunications and utility clients deploy technology solutions supporting both the consumer space, business to business, and corporate systems focused on accelerating speed to value and reduced costs of IT. Brian, welcome.
Thanks, Guy. Good morning. Excited to share my thoughts on these topics today.
Excellent. And also with us is Charlotte Patrick. Charlotte is an independent industry analyst covering the use of analytics, artificial intelligence, and automation at telecommunication companies. Her areas of interest include technologies focused on uptake and efficacy resulting in financial benefit. Charlotte brings 13 years of experience as an analyst at Gartner Group and 10 years plus at various telecommunications companies such as AT&T, Colt, and Telefonica O2. So welcome to all of you. Before we get started, a quick note to our audience. You are able to ask some questions, and we hope to have some time at the end where we can take a few. And if we can't get to all the questions, we will submit some written responses afterwards. ETI Software Solutions is sponsoring today's event, and they will be following up with all of you on those written responses. If you look at your screen, you should find, if you're not familiar with this platform, a questions tab or menu pull down. And in that space, you can type in questions, and I'll do my best to pull them down as we approach the end of our session. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and get into it. Sai, are you ready? Because I'm going to start with you.
Go for it, Guy.
So Sai, I want to start with cloud and cloud technology. We know that it's really not a new trend. You know, many telecoms, from what I've seen, have adopted cloud in one fashion or another. I think we've seen software as a service adopted. We've seen more of a thrust towards cloud native applications development. But something that we are seeing now is really an acceleration of moving core systems application to the public cloud, more of an infrastructure as a service. So I'm interested in your thoughts as it pertains to the right big bets. Should telcos be thinking about adopting public cloud for their core business applications? Do you think this is a wise investment? Sai.
Good question, Guy. I'll try to keep my answer short. I can go on for an hour, to answer that.
Okay.
But, I mean, from a core business applications perspective, I don't think there's a big difference between a telco and any other enterprise for that matter. So we do a lot of cloud, what we call cloud migration assessment for different companies. And what in general, when we interview them, what we have seen is that, there are different, at high level, there are a few categories, I would say, of applications. One, which are more about privacy and confidentiality, and people are, want to keep them close to the chest, if I can use that term. So that's one category. There is another one, these applications, I'm sure we'll get into it later, but some which have to be close to the customer, right? So that, they get the, benefits of less latency and so on, the second category. And there is a third category, which I would call candidates for cloud migration, meaning these applications don't have to be close to the customer or don't have to be close to the chest. They can be in the cloud. And in our analysis, depending on the company, there's about 40 to 60% of the workloads which fall in this, candidates for cloud category. So that's a huge, right? And they get different kinds of benefits, right? One is in terms of automation, which is today's topic, that these workloads can sort of go faster to the market. That's an obvious benefit of moving to cloud. Second, if you see these days, there is a lot of focus on sustainability, green energy and social, contributions and all that. Even this is sort of a new trend where, the savings you get by moving to the cloud, you can contribute to different parts of the society, which is a very good thing. And finally, the overall cost benefit, we have seen that companies or applications usually save between 25 and 35% of the resources. When you're building on-prem, you're building for, your peak usage, which is probably, sometimes one day a year, sometimes 1 month a year, depends on your business, right? So telecoms, tend to be in, holiday areas where, your peak usage comes. So, given all this, it makes sense to move to the cloud because you get a lot of savings, right? And you can reinvest the savings into, making better business applications.
Very good.
That's a good,
Yeah.
leading to
I love it. In fact, I really appreciate even the social responsibility element that you focused on that I think is sometimes forgotten. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Okay, let me move over to Brian. Hello, Brian.
All right. Good morning. Good morning again.
Hi. Yeah, it is your turn indeed. Hey, Brian, when we think about cloud, clearly many telcos have full-fledged cloud efforts underway today. I saw a study recently by a major systems integrator, though, that surprised me. It stated that only 35% of senior IT executives feel that they're meeting the objectives originally set out by their cloud effort for one reason or another, but only 35%. I thought that number is concerning. Really, two-part question for you. Do you agree, again, that a shift to the public cloud is a good bet? And then give me some thoughts on that 35% number, please.
All right. Well, that's a great question, and I think it's important to explore both parts of that. So let me first tell you my thoughts on moving to the public cloud. I do agree that it's a good bet, and I think it's an important one that companies make. When I think about why you would want to move to the public cloud, I think about digital transformation. So if we, reel back a year and think about what's happened, in this COVID-19 timeframe, right? COVID-19 caused us to move fast and speed up the adoption of digital technology, and we made years of progress in such a short amount of time. Organizations had to deploy solutions that reduced face-to-face while keeping their customers and employees safe. And so we saw changes like grocery stores shifting to online ordering and delivery. Telehealth solutions emerged and became more prevalent. There were improvements in online mobile banking and increase in video streaming options, right? Just to name a few. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the type of agility that's enabled by the cloud. I also read a very interesting survey that indicated that the crisis changed the mindset of executives in the role of technology in business. And previously, more than half ranked cost savings as the most important priority, but now only 10% are viewing it that way, and more than half are investing in technology for their competitive advantage. And so that's why I think, and that's why I see the public cloud as an important investment. It's all about innovation, it's about agility. But that said, yeah, why are some organizations failing? Why aren't they meeting their objectives? I'd kind of highlight maybe four key drivers that I see as reasons why they may not be achieving their overall goal. One, companies often overlook the cultural transformation that's required with the movement to the cloud. As I talked about some of those examples, right? Those are about moving fast, being the first mover. And so it's not just about deploying the technology, it's about building that culture of innovation and agility. And so there's training, there's change management required when you consider a move to the public cloud. Companies also often fail to implement a cloud governance model. If we think about when you and I grew up as developers, right? We worked in a very constrained environment with a finite number of applications, finite environments that we could work within. And the cloud it seems infinite. You can auto scale beyond out of control, right? So the possibilities are endless. So implementing the right cloud governance from the beginning is critical to avoid these escalating costs and to drive the cost savings that Sai indicated were possible. I also see that many organizations have, they piloted, they moved some of the easy applications fast, and those were likely successful, but now they're down to the hard legacy applications. And some of these need to be refactored or replaced before they're actually moved to the cloud. And so organizations should focus on, what it is they want to achieve. How do they prioritize what they move to the cloud? How do they design a hybrid architecture? I think it's commonly thought of that hybrid is likely going to be the model going forward. 100% public isn't possible for every organization. And then what tools are out there to help modernize the applications that you have left effectively so that they can be moved? Those are some considerations that can help companies be successful. And then finally, I would say cloud security is a major concern for enterprises that's slowing down cloud adoption. If you think about what the hyperscalers have put in place, they have world-class security organizations and security capabilities built into their offerings. But it's ultimately up to the customer to secure their data in the cloud by using these capabilities. And so many clients have not set up their security plans or governance, and those things are critical. Set up the security plans, put the governance in place to make sure that policies and standards are followed, and so that the data can be secured while it's in the cloud. So I'd say those are the four key reasons that I see on why many companies aren't achieving the objectives.
Those are fantastic, Brian. In fact, I just want to emphasize from my experience, the one that you mentioned on the cultural readiness, that is key. And not just when you're adopting, say, emerging technologies. I think most of us have seen that in any shift, right? In any major change, spending time getting the organization ready and addressing the culture of the organization is imperative. So I appreciate those thoughts. Okay, very good. Now, Charlotte, I'm going to come to you next. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Great. Charlotte, in the discussion on moving to cloud, many thought leaders in our industry basically say that that is not enough, right? And with the shift and the introduction of 5G and the acceleration of Internet of Things, the need for real-time data at scale, by the way, real-time data at scale has given rise to edge computing. And we've all read many things in edge computing. The way I like to think about it in simple terms, it's about moving your compute resources and also the data closer to the customer. We all know that that will bring performance gains, right? Really by addressing the latency concerns that need to be addressed for new business models. So the question to you, as a revenue generator, is edge a technology investment area that telcos should be considering?
So I think the real business case for telcos around edge compute is just a really complicated calculation. It's going to take a massive spreadsheet. It reminds me of an area of telco opportunity which I've been involved in for a number of years, and I just know it will be necessary to look in detail at each of the opportunities and exactly what part the telcos are going to play, just because each opportunity has its own risk factors, affecting the business model. So things like there are many opportunities which each have different technical needs that will need telco investment in new technology, and also many of them will need slightly different operational support. And then there's an ecosystem of very particular sorts of partners that will be needed, and there may be slightly different competitors, each with different capabilities for each opportunity. We've got regulatory environments that differ dependent on the use case, and we've got many markets are still nascent in themselves, and so the telcos will need to place bets on the general viability of that market, and which solutions will be taken up, and so on and so forth. And that's like another whole set of dimensions. And then probably most important of all, sales is going to need to be able to sell this stuff if you're sitting in a telco, and that's always a difficult issue. And is it actually worth it in all the risk factors because of the way it takes time to sell. So on the positive side, I do think that telcos have now gone through a kind of couple of cycles of dealing with more complex markets and with faster competitors, and they're more used to dealing with their internal organizational drag. And they've been making decisions on a range of smaller revenue opportunities and where to place their bets for a bit. So in some ways they're kind of better set up for this opportunity. But edge is not cheap, because we're talking about distributed technologies across a whole network, which is going to increase the complexity of the business cases. And there's also the overarching decision making about where telcos will be best to play. Perhaps just focusing on the platform makes sense for kind of 95% of all edge opportunities. I'm in question mark. And so having said all of this, if I was to forecast the likely financial opportunity for telcos, I would bet that we will see sort of a range. So a revenue stream for kind of general platform capabilities. It's not going to be huge, but it's probably worth doing. A small number of key opportunities which will emerge as being viable for most telcos with a 5G network. And then a number that will only be viable for the largest telcos with SI and other capabilities. There will then be some opportunities where telcos already have a strong potential in that and strong portfolio in that vertical. It just makes sense for them to do those things. And then a group which perhaps one or two telcos will make a success of becoming of dealing with certain opportunities because of local market factors or just luck, frankly. So adding all this together, I would say that this is another revenue stream for a telco, but I'm pragmatic that it will turn the dials on overall telco revenue growth. So I'm going with being somewhat pragmatically optimistic.
Very, very good. And by the way, Charlotte, when you have that big spreadsheet put together, can you please share it with me?
Of course.
I'd love to see it. Fantastic thoughts. Again, I do agree. A pragmatic approach makes sense. Let's shift gears a little bit. And Sai, I'd like to come back to you. The Gartner Group recently stated that 10% of enterprise generated data is created and processed somewhere in a cloud. So not in the traditional data center. They put that estimate at about 10%. But what I thought was interesting is the prediction that by 2025, that number will grow to 75%. So this means that there will be another shift in that data, whether it's in the cloud or not, will likely not be centralized in one place. So think about distributed data. So the question to you, when it comes to distributed data, first, do you agree with that prediction of 75% of data being produced outside of the traditional data center prem? And then secondly, what does this mean to telecommunication companies?
Interesting question, Guy. I think, you can look at it differently, that, with some of the things you mentioned earlier, IoT, mainly, and Industry 4.0, these will generate data, right? There will be a lot of data generated. So there is growth of data, and that has to be stored somewhere, right? So the prediction that it will be in the cloud, at the moment is probably a right one. But when you say cloud, I think there is, you have to go beyond your traditional centralized cloud, right? So there are two shifts that are happening. One is, there are people I have seen, they are going to multi-clouds. For example, the same organization probably uses 2 or 3 clouds because of their capabilities, which they want to exploit. That's one. And second, that's one way of distributing data. Another is, I think Brian mentioned earlier, the whole notion of hybrid. There'll be some data, especially about privacy. If you're an e-commerce, you're collecting some data which is private. Those will be more, closer to the chest, like I said. And there is a third aspect, which I think Charlotte mentioned and covered, which is the edge, right? So the data will be spread across all these areas, but all of them together is what will be called cloud in the future, right? Whether it's private cloud, right? Because all the cloud providers have their own technologies now, which make your on-prem also into a operational cloud, right? You can do Kubernetes and containerization and all that on-prem, but you have these public clouds where you put the workload there. You don't have to worry about managing the infra, and then you have the edge, especially if you have manufacturing or even games. Like NFL did something recently, if you followed that news, Guy, that in one stadium they did some something around the mech, right, to give better user experience. All this will generate huge amounts of data, because a lot of that data in the future will be videos. And when your data increases like that, obviously you cannot store it on-prem anymore. And sometimes the data is generated, how do I say it, closer to the action, if you will, whether it's a game or a manufacturing plant, right, or a bottling plant, whatever, right? So that data has to go somewhere, right? And if you look at the the way people are looking at containerization or the edge, for example, there is the carrier edge or the network edge, which is the edge of the carrier. Then there is the enterprise edge, where you sort of come into the enterprise. There's a device edge, so much of the processing will happen in the devices itself. So if so much data is generated, it has to go somewhere. And if the question is, will there be so much increase in data, about 10-fold more, the answer is yes, right? Because all the devices will start generating data. And it will be in the cloud, whether it's a network cloud or the edge or the central cloud. It depends on the application. It will somehow be distributed between the 3 areas. Hope that answers the question, Guy.
It does. It does. You mentioned something, and I think some of the others alluded to it as well. It's not about whether or not you go to cloud. I think it's a matter of when. I really do. And this point that you made about hybrid cloud and a distributed edge environment, I think that's key. Which also reminds me that there is going to be a real need, right, in technology to deal with the management of this, what can end up being a very complex environment, right? And we're already seeing that. We're seeing some, frankly, new startups in terms of managing distributed data, dealing with the security questions when you move to this distributed environment. So it really will be interesting to watch the tools that will continue to evolve to move to as we move to this hybrid environment. Okay. Some great thoughts. What I'd like to do, Brian, is come back to you, but I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to keep it more general. Okay, sticking with edge computing. The general question to you, what are your thoughts on telcos placing a big bet on edge computing? Should they do it? What are your thoughts on why or why not?
Okay. Yeah, I'd say my thoughts are kind of similar to what Charlotte said, and I promise I didn't look over her notes for the call. But we all know edge computing is one of the central drivers to scale and exploit the Internet of Things. By the end of 2020, we had over 20 billion devices out there, and I think by 2030 we're forecasted to have over 500 billion. So it's just going to grow exponentially over time, and the amount of data that's produced, the amount of real-time processing that needs to happen with 5G and edge is going to be critical. So I do think it's a safe bet for telcos, but they need to think about what business model they want to be in, as it relates to edge. And that could range from simply being the 5G from the network provider or helping customers, with end-to-end solutions. So that's a broad range. I'd say they have a natural advantage in edge computing because for it to work, right, you need smaller data centers that are located near the devices. They already have a lot of this hardware and capability in place, and I think this is something that will give them an upper hand, over the hyperscalers as they're building, out more local data centers. Security, it's also an important component of what telcos bring to the table, and it could be an additional revenue stream for them. Consumers, enterprises, everyone's going to demand more security with IoT devices out there. And the telcos have a strong track record in keeping their network secure. So it's a strong offering. So I think although edge hosting is a natural approach, providing that either infrastructure or platform, as a service, for edge, it's going to have a limited impact on their business going forward. And the telcos are going to have to really decide, can they reimagine themselves and be forward-thinking players with edge computing. Yeah, so that's my thought about, where telcos should go with edge.
Yeah, great comments, and I really love your comment about having an advantage. Again, it probably depends on the tiers, right? Also of telcos, especially if you look at tier ones and you think about the infrastructure. I kind of think about all the central offices, right? With all that real estate space, frankly, right? And how does that help from an advantage point of view with edge computing? Right. So some great thoughts, but I'd like to shift to another technology space, Charlotte, if I may. And Charlotte, I'm thinking about artificial intelligence here. And when I talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning and deep learning go hand in hand with those, right? So telcos, again, this is not new. Many telcos have been talking about adopting artificial intelligence, machine learning and deep learning, really to optimize, from what I've seen, their work, right? And also, past optimization, continue to explore new revenue streams, as we talked about before. Yet the truth is, from what I've observed, some telcos remain skeptical because they haven't seen the return on investment from some past efforts in this space. So really a two-part question coming to you. Should telcos put, or continue to put, for those who have started, their limited capital in projects focused on artificial intelligence? And then the second part is, if you believe that they should, are there a couple of key processes, functional areas that you think are primed for this?
Yeah, so having come from Gartner, I of course think of things on the hype cycle, and as they go up the hype cycle, everything's going to be fantastic, and then it reaches the top and starts to go down, and you know, the algorithms need good quality data sets which are not available, or they don't always work very well, or the organization and processes around them need to change. All sorts of issues we've seen. And I also think in some of the key areas for machine learning, such as the network, the ongoing investment cycle can be causing just a bit of a drag. So for example, there are a set of uses for machine learning in, say, network assurance, and we see some of them beginning to be deployed in the last few years. But then the 5G network investment ramps up and focus kind of shifts back to deploying descriptive assurance products which can do the basics. So we've sort of seen everything kind of shift back in terms of analytical complexity, shall we say. So you just say here kind of less progress in the deployment of some of the more interesting machine learning. Certainly in the last year, I've just been researching right now, there's less talk about machine learning than maybe there was a year ago. So I think that telcos need to focus on finding use cases with particular characteristics in the short term. So machine learning, good at dealing with efficiently with large high volume data sets with complicated computations. So lots of variables which are closely correlated and which are harder to solve for rules-based analytics. So you need to go and look for those sorts of problems. Then there are lots of problems in the telco that could be solved by machine learning, and it becomes a case of picking what's worthy of investment. So it's an issue of business case, and that's all sort of, so we say that's around machine learning. But then thinking specifically about AI, it's good for solving kind of slightly cooler problems, image detection, emotion detection, more fun things. But these problems are often not the most pressing things that telcos need to solve today. So you see some movements, but maybe not that much. And I think it will be a bit before the sorts of problems that AI solve become really, really big, and it becomes really, really interesting. So if I was to asked to advise on, you know, 2 or 3 business processes for investment in machine learning and AI, so the network will remain the main place. It has lots of data, and 5G IoT will dramatically increase this. Machine learning is good at finding significant patterns and anomalies. So an example of a good problem would be something like the automation of root cause analysis. So you need to understand kind of unknown unknowns by correlating data sources and looking for commonalities in order to diagnose problems that would otherwise have been hidden. So if you like, it's finding and articulating those problems that cannot be done without anything except machine learning. That should be sort of the first part of the process. And then after implementing some of these types of problems, we're really waiting for things like network orchestration to be rolled out. So one or more brains in the network which will take in information and make rules-based or machine learning-based decisions. And this is going to be kind of a few years as part of the rollout of SDN and FV. And this will, once that's here, then it will push forward more machine learning in the network to make intelligent automation. So there's kind of there's a push, but it's not massive as yet. Second place to look for good machine learning would be around process improvements. And again, machine learning can be used for spotting patterns and anomalies. So it can look for, say, at all the trouble tickets being raised and use decision trees to figure out underlying issues, and then highlight where there are live issues which would typically have gone unnoticed. An example, perhaps, there's an electricity failure at a cell site which wasn't visible without seeing a cluster of trouble tickets or patterns across a number of tickets. So that sort of process-led place is worth looking at. And then lastly, there seems to be a business case for including machine learning within the process of managing the data itself. So supporting data preparation using machine learning to accelerate data profiling, improve data quality for enrichment, metadata development, those sorts of use cases. So there's something around machine learning in the actual management of data, which is also worth looking at the moment for a telco.
Yeah, great points. Yeah, in fact, I hadn't thought about it this way, but you mentioned with the shift to SDN, software-defined networks, as our audience knows, I do agree with you. I think it makes the adoption somewhat easier, really, and the opportunity richer, right? I agree with that. So sticking with AI and really jumping off of, you know, your use case point, because I agree, you really have to pick your use cases. You know, I was looking at another report, and a leading systems integrator working in the AI space really said that telcos are focused heavily using AI in network planning and engineering, right? In fact, they continue to use some of the traditional, more, I guess, rules-based in-house models layered with some artificial intelligence planning tools. In fact, in that study, in one case, some of the results from a network planning perspective I thought were interesting, and in one case remarkable. Results like 37% improvement in capacity prioritization from a network perspective, 72% reduction in capacity degradation, and the one that I really found the most interesting was a 76% reduction in overbuilds. And the reason I find that interesting is those of us that have been in this industry for some time, you know that ultimately one way to ensure you're ready for market response was an overbuild, and it could be very expensive. So a 76% reduction in overbuilds, I think, is a remarkable number. So the question to you, Sai, is artificial intelligence a real opportunity from what you've seen in your practice? And again, of course, do you think telcos should invest?
The short answer, no, obviously is yes, Guy. That I think Charlotte covered a whole bunch of points in the AI area. But if you look at it, where telcos are focusing, right? One is the network build. I think you addressed some of it. Where do they go with this? I think Brian talked about how the 5G networks are being laid out. And in this area, especially when you go to RAN optimization, so there is a lot of learning as you expand your RANs. There's a lot of learning as you go from place to place, and you have to carry that learning and then use it in terms of your network build. So that's one key area, I think, where they need to continue to invest, both in collecting data and learn from it, and then do some kind of artificial intelligence. It's happening. All the big telcos are already engaged in it, and even the smaller ones will one day go there as they are building out the network. That's one key area. The second one is service assurance. I think Charlotte touched upon it a little bit, that the whole game of service assurance is changing once you go to this containerized workloads, right? Whether it's VNFs or CNFs, and so on. And the network is being built out much in a DevOpsy fashion, if you will, like your traditional applications on the IT side. There's still some time before it gets there and gets as matured as the IT side. But as this happens, right, there's a lot of data that will get generated on how your network is shaping out. And especially if you go into more complex use cases like network slicing, and how do you, at the end of the day, it's all about monetization of your network, right? Most of the network monetization will come from enterprises, if you will. The consumer will probably add a little bit of revenues, but a bunch of the 5G revenues will come from enterprises, right? As you're providing those services, these enterprises will also expect you to give some intelligence back to them on what is that they should do different, both in terms of how they buy the resources in the network, how they utilize them, going back to the data question is had, where data goes. So this is some kind of a global intelligence, I think the telcos will collect, right? And sort of that also, I think, coming, if you look fast forward 3-4 years down into the future, that's some asset, I think, which they can also sell, and how they can help the enterprises actually consume the resources. So those are some of my thoughts, Guy, on your point about if telcos should invest.
Yeah, they're fantastic thoughts. I tend to believe, going back to some of the comments, I think a small and slow start, in my opinion, is essential, because again, here I think there's going to be a need, right? There's going to be a need to remain competitive. So let me talk a little bit about analytics, right? And Charlotte, you could probably put together a big spreadsheet on this one too, because it is a big topic. as we know, another key discussion at telcos, we spend a lot of time talking about data, data generation, distributed data. But one of the things that I experienced was that it's not just about the collection of data, it's how do you bring meaning out of that data, right? Transforming a lot of data to valuable information that actually could give us that competitive advantage. We've seen plenty of use cases. Some of them include the network planning that we've talked about here from an analytics perspective. Others that we haven't touched on as much include customer behavior, predictive analytics, right? When it comes to network management and outages, from a sales perspective, collecting data so you can upsell, come up with the right offer management model, and of course more. Yet, similar to a point I brought up earlier, some telcos that did go all in, okay, have not seen the expected return on investment. So, Charlotte, I'd like to hear your thoughts on should the telecoms invest, right, or continue to invest, because many have, in analytics, and as important, do you have a sweet spot, right, of where you think telecom should focus their analytics venture? Please.
Yeah, sure. So thinking about it at a top level, I would say that telcos basically know where the best types of analytical problems are located these days. But calculating the financial value still to be collected, given that a lot of low-hanging fruit have gone, can be tricky. So, you know, the business cases tend to suffer from the same sorts of problems that appear if you try to justify the deployment of any new capability. Kind of classic examples. Theoretically, this deployment of analytics should improve customer experience, but calculating the financial value of this improvement and then definitively measuring against it, that can be tricky. Or deploying more analytics in this process will definitely improve the lives of the team by reducing the time for complex tasks, but the cost of the technology and cleaning up the data and improving the processes versus the small size of the team and the limited actual reduction in the time that you're saving makes the business case a bit more flimsy. So you tend to get problems as you go down that are less and less easy to put a business case against. And on the topic of having a spreadsheet model, I have a spreadsheet model of the which I took apart basically a telco into about 250 processes to try and calculate this residual value. And I would say that the most value tends to still be on the operational side. You've still got some classic big data problems in the depth of the network. Assurance, as we mentioned before, is a favorite area of mine to go looking for problems because there are lots of them. So, for example, the rising complexity of hybrid networks and the need to understand problems which arise across them is a good analytics challenge. Then there are planning and forecasting problems, particularly as already described within the network planning side, but also something like field services planning or maybe sales forecasting, which could benefit from additional analytics. And then there are still some analytical challenges, some of which also need machine learning around personalization. So this could be a really broad area which impacts a few different parts of the telco. It could be what content should be delivered via a new campaign, or what content should we put on a website. And then there's also the personalization of care or of sales. Mm-hmm. So improving what customer-facing staff know about the customer so that they can be more specific in the help that they offer. So in summary, I think I would say that there are quite a few of the most valuable challenges here now solved, but analytics allows a greater degree of depth of understanding about what's happening. There's also a depth of personalization, and analytics allow the ongoing tweaking as these circumstances change. So, they're going to change increasingly fast as telcos automate and also as they implement new 5G products. So I think it's likely that the market for analytics will just continue, and we will continue to see small amounts added on an ongoing basis over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I'm sure we could spend an hour on that alone, and maybe we will in the future. I'd like to, Brian, go back to edge computing, but from a slightly different perspective. You know, when I read and have conversations on edge computing, I typically hear and see coupled with that conversation a discussion on new business models that will evolve. So I'd like to get your point of view really on the innovation side, right?
Mm-hmm.
What innovation do we expect? And are there some business models that are poised to explode?
Okay. Yeah, I think this is where it gets interesting when you think about how 5G and Edge and IoT can come together to create some new ways of working and some new ideas for businesses. This is kind of what gets me excited as well. I think we've heard a lot of use cases in manufacturing, and we're hearing a lot about autonomous vehicles. So those are things that people are hearing a good bit of. I think it's going to be interesting to see a lot of the new innovation that comes about in retail, healthcare, sports, and agriculture. To name just a few. And if you think about the retail use case, fewer customers are visiting the brick and mortar stores these days with the rise of e-commerce. I mean, we talked about how the rise of e-commerce came about, during COVID-19 and was on the rise before, but there are fewer customers in the stores. And the retailers have to keep up with these changing customer expectations. Their loyalty is declining, but they still have to manage their operational efficiency. And so some of these new solutions like smart shelves, store layout optimization using infrared analytics on infrared sensors, digital signage that's customized to the customers that are in the store, sending beacons to alerts to customers that are nearing your store or in your store or on a particular aisle. I mean, that's exciting stuff that's really going to change, I think, the way retail works. We're also seeing major changes in healthcare. The big four tech companies are really focused on disrupting healthcare as we know it today. Microsoft is focusing on cloud health systems. Apple's, researching more on wearables. Alphabet's driving AI on precision medicine, and while Amazon's kind of focused across the whole sector. So I think things like the remote patient monitoring, of health conditions, vital signs is exciting. Smart medication dispensers. We know that, some people don't take the right dosage at the right time, as well as automation in hospitals. The things that we should expect to see, smart beds, things in the surgery rooms, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I mentioned sports earlier and some of the enhanced fan experience. I think that's something that's exciting, right? Being fed content about some of your favorite athletes or teams, seeing real-time graphical analytics on that team or person's performance, augmented reality around what's actually happening. And then the venues have a lot of innovation that they can bring as well, through cameras, sensors, detecting large crowds, unexpected events, helping to find missing persons, based on facial recognition and attributes about what they're wearing. And then finally, I'd highlight agriculture, and I think this is one that's kind of often overlooked, but it's so critical, right? I was reading something that said it's estimated that we need to increase food production by 70% by 2050. That's significant, considering the declining land that's available and the reduction in workforce that's happening in agriculture. Mm-hmm. So I think innovations on crop sensing, to understand light, humidity, temperature, and automatically, resolve those through irrigation or feeding. Drones, that are now being provided as a service that can help assess crop health and actually individual plant health is kind of exciting. And then tracking the well-being of livestock. So all those are, great innovations that I think are going to reduce waste, improve productivity, and help monitor crops from anywhere. So I think those, just to name a few, I think it's poised to explode kind of all over the place.
Yeah, great points. And by the way, I was also reading some things in agriculture, and quite frankly, I don't think I focused enough on the opportunity there with, coupling Internet of Things, things like soil samples. If you go back and you read studies on what electricity did to change agriculture and the productivity gains, you will find that with broadband, and the reason we're having big discussions on moving broadband to rural areas also has to do with maximizing some of those agricultural opportunities. I would add one more to that great list: smart cities, right? big opportunities in innovation in smart cities. Okay, what I want to do is pick up the pace a little bit and move to one of my favorite segments that I call the lightning round. So here I'm looking for a short answer, not even an explanation, definitely no spreadsheets, Charlotte, okay? So the first question, it goes to each of you real quick, we're going to go around, has to do with spend. Do you think in 2021, telcos will spend about the same, more, or less on technology? Let's start with Charlotte.
The same.
Di.
Almost the same, maybe a little bit more.
You had to qualify. Brian.
More.
More. See, interesting, very interesting. You know, let's talk about talent shortage. You really can't deploy any of these technologies without talent. So from where you sit and what you see, do you see that companies are facing or will face talent shortage in the adoption and deployment of these technologies? Charlotte.
Yeah, I think they're going to need some new supporting roles around the tech to help them to do this.
What about you, Sai?
Yes, I think it will take a few years before all these technologies, become commoditized, if I can use that word.
Sure. Brian.
Yes, I think, cloud ready engineers, people that are trained, companies need to focus on getting folks trained before they embark on these new developments.
Great. We talked a lot about return on investment and paybacks, the theme of our discussion here today. When you think about these technologies and you could only pick one, okay, and you could only pick one, would you say the return on investment will be driven primarily by operational efficiencies, new revenue, or maybe something else? Let's go again with you, Charlotte.
Cost reductions until 5G services are rolled out.
Very good. Sai?
I would go 50-50, cost reduction and incremental revenues.
See, Sai couldn't give me just one. But I like the creative way that you answered, though. Brian.
I'm going to say new revenue, that customers need to focus on how these can bring new revenue and new business models.
Or seriously, Guy, because I do a lot of this cloud assessment, migration assessment, and there are two key aspects, how do you save and how do you increase revenue?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I often face, prioritization and capital challenges, right? Where do we invest? So my question again, just if you had to save one project, let's say you have a cloud effort underway, an edge effort underway, AI and analytics. And I know, by the way, these are all very related. But if you had to fall on the sword and save one of those, which one would you save, Charlotte?
AI, and more specifically under that, machine learning.
Sai.
Cloud.
Brian.
Cloud.
You guys are somewhat predictable. Okay, let me do this. I promised the audience that we will take some questions. Again, just a reminder, before we approach the end, you can post a question in the box here. Let me make sure I don't mess this up and see what questions we may have. We'll take a couple and then we'll close. So, first question, is it wise to go with one cloud service provider, or should you consider using several? We kind of touched on this already, so it makes sense, Sai, that I throw it to you.
I mean, the answer is it depends, but if you are a big enough enterprise, then it makes sense for you to be in more than one cloud service provider. You don't have as much as you migrate and you modernize the applications, you still have certain qualities of these applications that sort of more lean them towards a particular cloud provider. So, and also sometimes you buy third-party applications which are sort of made for one particular cloud. So there's a lot of factors. I think you have to,
Sure.
sort of, expand. I think the trend is visible over the last few years. A couple of years ago, everybody picked one. If you look at major corporations, then slowly they started, signing up with more providers. That sort of gives them the flexibility. Although they all have one preferred provider. If you are building an application from scratch, they tell you where you should actually go for it. But in general, they have relationship with many.
Good, good. Hey, Brian, I'd like you to take this one, maybe just kind of a 30-second, keeping an eye on the time here. So if you have a company that's, let's say, stuck in legacy systems, right? Can they move to adoption of these emerging technologies, or do you think some type of modernization effort is necessary first?
Yeah, I think when a company's thinking about it, you need to look at your applications and think about, how important is the business process that's supported? How able are you to migrate that technology, and develop your roadmap from there? So in some cases, you may decide to just move the application as it exists today. No need to exploit cloud native capabilities. In other cases, you do need to modernize it. And there are different ways to do it. You can do a quick lift and shift. You may want to go ahead and redevelop the application in cloud native. So I think it's important to, like I said, think about what's the business imperative behind that application. Where is it going to take you? And does it make sense to exploit what's available in the cloud, or are you just moving it there for the efficiency gain?
Right, right. Okay, well, as they say, time goes by fast, especially when it's an interesting conversation. So I'd like to do this as we close. First, I really want to thank all of you, our panelists, Charlotte, Cy, Brian, just some great feedback, very thoughtful insights I think that we can put to use. So thanks to you. Also want to thank ETI Software Solutions for sponsoring and putting on this event today. And also, I have to mention, for also being at the forefront of these discussions and bringing solutions to customers to delight their customers. So thank you, ETI Software. Finally, want to mention that I will be hosting some future sessions where we hope to take each of today's topics to a little bit lower detailed discussion, where we will address questions like, what specific tactics have our experts seen and deployed in a practical way, right, that can benefit others? So look for that. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us, our audience today, and I wish you a good day, and I wish you a great return on your technology investments. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Guy.
Thank you.